Okay, so we are back. This time around, we're going to do another Halloween session. The vampire one was a lot of fun. And now we're picking from an outline by our executive producer, Tim Tolbert, who was not able to make it tonight, but intended to. But he said, hey, use my ideas. It's all good. So this one is on horror TV. So any horror that's been on television anywhere in the world, it can be a TV series, it can be a limited series, it can be a TV movie. And there are some things that even, like Twin Peaks: The Return kind of is like five different things all in one, just as an example that I enjoy. Um, so we picked a few each, and we're going to do a round table of kind of our first one each, and then we'll swing back around and do some more. So Scott Andrew Hutchins has agreed to go first. I think he has never gone first. Um, Justin is kind of our default host premiere guy, but he is also not able to attend. So we leave it to you, sir. What do you have for us?
First, I'm going to talk about Erie, Indiana. This was a series I actually saw in its original run when I could because they kept moving around the schedule. And one of the episodes didn't even get shown until it went into syndication. It was created by Jose Rivera and Carl Schaefer, and Joe Dante was the creative consultant, and he directed five of the
Hmm,
episodes.
I forgot
It,
another. Hmm.
yeah, and he appears in one of the episodes,
No.
and it's a really fascinating series. Like when I was a kid, so I grew up in Indianapolis, and like no TV show was like ever set in Indiana. So it was, even though it was set in a little town, I was kind of thrilled that there was a show that was actually set in Indianapolis in Indiana, and they kept mentioning Indianapolis a number of times in it. But it's about a boy named Marshall Teller, who's played by Omri Katz, who would go on to be in Matinee and Hocus Pocus. Matinee was, of course, another Joe Dante film.
And he
And
started on Dallas
yeah,
as a child
and
actor. Yeah.
Justin Shenkarow, who is his 10-year-old friend Simon Holmes, and they're the only people who get that Erie, Indiana is a strange place and where all this weird stuff happens. Like Elvis Presley is on the paper route and things like that. And so it was a comedic show. They really didn't know what kind of audience they were going for. They decided it had to be for kids because the lead was going to be kids, but they wanted the because kids wouldn't be seen as crazy for thinking all this stuff in the same way that an adult would be, and
Mhm.
they wanted to do a lot of social commentary in it. They make surprising commentary about capitalism throughout it. They even mention it specifically in the text of the episodes. There's one episode called "The Losers," which is directed by Joe Dante, where there's people who's this or it's their job to make sure people lose things in order to keep the economy going. And there
Oh,
and there's another episode called Zombies in PJs where Rene Auberjonois plays a parody of Donald Trump called the Donald,
Oh
and
my,
Oh my
who
God.
is actually a demon from hell who's getting people to
wow.
sell their souls by buying things from the local general store.
This
Well,
has
this is
aged fascinating. I'm here for it.
yeah, this is well
Yes.
before his presidential run.
when was this
Yeah.
made?
Wow.
When was this made again?
This ran in 1991 and 1992.
Okay.
The fifth
Oh, I
episode
forgot about him.
unfortunately got preempted and didn't get shown until it
Ah,
was in syndication. And unfortunately, they laid the DVD out in air date order. Was like you really need to watch that one fifth, even though there's the continuity is between episodes isn't particularly strong until the last few because. In the 14th episode, they retooled the series. They added Jason Marsden, who had previously played Eddie Munster on The Munsters
hmm,
Today, and he speaks
hmm.
in this voice like this most of the time. And so he plays this character who eventually calls himself Dash X because he has positive and negative symbols on the back of his hands. And in the last episode, um, Marshall finds out that his reality is a TV show,
Hmm.
and Dash X, who is still calling him, he's the only one who's not using his actor name, is trying to kill him off to replace him on the show. And the series was heavily retooled for that 14th episode, not only introducing that character, but early on there was a character in the series named Mr. Radford, who was played by Archie Hahn, and in that episode he's revealed, well, every episode he wears these strange costumes, and like it's like he's always in disguise. And apparently he's like this madman who likes to impersonate people, and he kept the real Radford in the basement, and the real Radford was played by John Astin. And Archie Hahn's character is revealed to be called Fred Suggs. He gets pulled out in a straitjacket, and then he ends up as a bank teller later in the episode, and he gets recognized by Marshall. Of course, nobody else realizes that this is the other Mr. Radford. So there's some crazy stuff going on. Ray Walston plays an alien who's developing a TV. He's helping the development of TV so he can go back where he came from, and it involves this crazy version of the Moose Lodge with a Loyal Order of the Corn, which is, and they wear like these crazy hats and stuff. And there's also
Freemasons.
there's a lot of subtle stuff in it. There's some influence of Twin Peaks. They have Harry Goaz playing a cop named Sergeant Knight, and they drop little hints because like you actually see the statue for the Loyal Order of the Corn much earlier in the episode, but in the episode it appears in, it's painted, but it's like copper green in the previous episodes. And there's another one of the best reviewed episodes is called Heart on a Chain. It is a Joe Dante directed episode. It has Danielle Harris as a love interest character, and she later was in a film called Inoperable that I'll eventually probably want to talk about on the show because I was pretty amazed by it. And it was about a girl who gets a heart of a guy who was also Marshall, and this other guy Devin were both interested in her, and she has a weak heart. And Devin is always like doing this with a pen with his hands, and so she gets his heart after he gets killed because he's this reckless guy, and she starts acting like him. And she needs to get his spirit to leave him alone. And it's interesting because this was actually produced by the same people as Unsolved Mysteries, and they did an episode about somebody who got a heart transplant, and she found out who she got the heart transplant from. She found out that she had started liking like the foods that she hadn't liked before, and the guy who had the heart liked those foods and things like that. So that's really interesting because it was made by the same people, the same studio, Cosgrove Mura, that made Unsolved Mysteries. So it's a lot of strange, quirky stuff, lot of interesting guest stars, and when it got into syndication, it got popular enough that they put out a bunch of novels, and they brought out a second series, which I haven't seen. It was called Erie, Indiana: The Other Dimension, because it was the original cast was too old for it to really work. But it's a really fascinating show, and it eventually found an audience, but it's not too well known.
So it only ran one season?
It ran one season, 19 episodes.
Okay. And
I'm really interested. Like, I gotta say that like stuff with like a local flair like that has always been really fascinating to me. Like, I as a writer try to incorporate a lot of Georgia in the stuff that I write because I grew up in Metro Atlanta and in the suburbs of Atlanta. And I feel like you talking about it with like, oh, they're mentioning Indiana, they're mentioning Indianapolis, like kind of seems like this is like the Stephen King of Indiana, except it's just a one season show, but just kind of that like, hey, that's my town. It's kind of
well, literally, I mean, I could beat this dead horse like endlessly, but Twin Peaks did change everything on television permanently. Yeah. So the idea
even references to Twin. There's an episode called Mr. Cheney, which is about a werewolf who's played by Stephen Root, who would go on to be a villain and Get Out. And he gets smacked in the back by Dash X with a log, and he says, "Well, it ain't the log lady."
Yeah, the whole thing about places, that's a very Lynchian thing. But
it was interesting this time watching it because I think the last time I saw it, I had not yet seen Twin Peaks, and I have since seen Twin Peaks. So.
Okay.
I saw so many things that like called back to Twin Peaks before I ever finally watched Twin Peaks. Like, gosh, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I finally watched the show, and I was just like, "Where has this been all my life?" Like,
right. Well, what's amazing is, that he did it in 2017 again. And basically all these shows that were strongly influenced by him that are now like popular long form genre shows on cable. And there are a lot of them are very weird and have gone really far. He brought Twin Peaks back and he blew all of them away. He got even more weirder, more esoteric, more
Yeah.
adult, more
Yeah.
cinematic. And it's like nobody can touch the king, man. Sorry. I mean, I appreciate they're trying because usually they say, yeah, that's my favorite show. Like
Right.
Chris Carter
Yeah.
or Damon Lindelof and all these people are like, yeah, it's Twin Peaks. I mean, they don't try to hide it or anything. They're very happy about it. And so to see the only thing that disappointed me was, uh, the Emmys didn't really give a fuck about it. Kyle got
Yeah.
nominated for Best Actor, and that was it. But he didn't win, which is like, how
Right.
can you watch The Return and not expect him to win that?
Yeah.
Playing
Yeah.
playing three distinctly different characters,
Mhm.
yet
Like
are
he's
all
got acting
mystically connected.
chops, yeah, like
Yeah.
Yeah.
and the fact that you
Great
can
range.
tell, like, even if he's not like, even if it's not like stated which character he is at the time, like they're so distinct
Yes.
that you can really just tell as you're watching it. Like even if you just dropped a clip with no context, you'd
Yeah.
be like, oh, he's being that guy, oh, now he's being that guy. Like
It's like
that's
Jeremy Irons in Dead Ringers. There's no ever mistaking which is which, brother. Because
Yeah.
Irons is
Mhm.
just a motherfucking actor. I mean, um, with Kyle, uh, there's a 5 hour making of documentary on the Blu-ray set of The Return, and it's worth watching the whole thing. Maybe not at one sitting, but you see how Lynch works now, and a real testimony to the synergy between him and Kyle, and Kyle's brilliance as an actor is that there are many cases where the whole script was written by Mark Frost and David Lynch. They followed the script. The
Mhm.
script is only 500 pages, and it's an 18-hour uh,
Mhm.
event. So that's why a lot of scenes are, visually more visual, more cinematic. They're padded out. So Kyle knew all the lines, but there were times when there would be something happening, and sometimes it would be something that would be an effects heavy thing that would be fixed in post. And the way Lynch used the CGI was also controversial in that, unlike Marvel, say, or Star Wars, he doesn't try to make the fantastic look realistic. He makes it
Mhm.
surrealistic on purpose. And so some people are like, "Oh, these effects suck," and I'm like, you're really not getting it, man."
you don't
Um,
understand what he's trying to do here.
no,
Yeah.
not at all. But he would actually have Kyle in these situations as whatever character.
Well, he had a green rubber glove as a weapon, so that was
Well, that
you
was that
you
was
you, you kind of know what he's going for when he does stuff like that. It's
well,
not
he's
realism.
well when
Huh?
he that whole idea of that character. First of all, my brain's blanking on the name of the character, but he was named after one of the characters in the Wild Bunch. He does that a lot. He
Mhm.
takes character names from other films. He's done it repeatedly. That character also was it's generally, I don't know, I didn't have a strong opinion about it one way or another, but I can kind of accept this theory that it was Lynch's satire of superheroes. That superheroes now are expected to come in and save everybody. You give Freddy, that's his name, Freddy, this magic green glove, and he's supposed to be the destined one to kill Bob.
Mhm.
And it plays out, and it's like, oh, and it's like so ridiculous, and it's like a deliberate Deus ex machina that
Mhm.
from the minute it's introduced as the Deus ex machina, it's gonna be one, and I think there's as with most of his stuff, there's a strong satirical element there. But what I was going to say about Kyle is in this documentary, there were times he would be in a situation as a certain character, and he would be like, okay, try this, or, okay, now you feel like this, and that's not in the script. And Kyle could do it, boom, one take every time. Like he's in a theater improv group of like the highest caliber, and um, that impressed me. I've never actually seen that process being filmed. I'm sure it's been filmed many times. I'm sure it's nothing completely new to Lynch, but I had never seen uh, either of these guys worked that way or knew that they worked that way. Now, he doesn't work that way with all the actors, but since Kyle is the one he's psychically linked to, and no, I'm not joking about that, I'm being serious, the one he's psychically attuned to, and also, the main character. So the weight's on him to be able to have that facility. He can switch from character to character, but he can switch from emotion to emotion within one character with Lynch just yelling through a little monitor. and it works,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, he
So
he was telling a lot of actors like do that line again and do it this way, and
yes, he
and
was
he and
hard
he
on.
did it a lot. And it's like
He
a
did.
lot of actors wouldn't put up with that, but most of them knew Lynch, and the ones who didn't really wanted to work with him anyway.
He had a lot of
Mm.
actors, a lot of well-known actors who had never worked with Lynch, and most people would never even associate with working with Lynch, uh, like Ashley Judd and Tom Sizemore and Michael Cera. All these people wanted to work with David Lynch because he's David
Mhm.
Lynch, and because
Yeah.
they liked Twin Peaks. And Naomi Watts wanted to work with him because he broke her whole career. You know, she wasn't getting any younger when she made Mulholland Drive. I mean, she's my age in real life. And that movie was only 21 years ago, 22 years ago. So she was kind of
And
passing
she
her
actually
prime.
made her debut in Matinee, which I mentioned previously.
Yeah, and she was in Tank Girl. She was in a bunch of things in tiny roles, um, but you know, right out of the gate with Mulholland Drive, again, playing a doppelganger role, she's just absolutely brilliant, and she's really thankful to him for pushing her like that. So anyway,
Mhm.
I sorry I went on a tangent, but I'm not going to cover Twin Peaks properly, but I think it should at least be referenced.
Mentioned. If
Yeah,
we're gonna
Yeah.
talk about horror television and you don't bring up,
absolutely.
then talk
Yes.
about
Yeah.
horror television.
So, Kaylin, while you
Which
have
is
the
interesting
floor,
because when I
oh,
watched the original series, I didn't even think of it as horror.
Yeah.
Certainly
well, it
certainly
evolved.
the
It
third
evolved.
season,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Well,
That's fair.
the movie is squarely horror. So,
Yeah.
so he kind of announced 30 some years ago, this is what I want to do, but I've been reined in by standards and practices on television.
Hmm.
Um,
And
and
then
this
he
was
just
this
kind of grew it and he got more powerful until they couldn't stop him. And he was just like, this
right.
is my mission.
And they did try to
Yeah.
stop him with the return. You know,
Yeah.
they cut his budget and they told him he had to do X, Y,
Yeah.
Z, and so he quit. And
Hmm.
Mark Frost was going to go ahead with another set of directors, and the crew and the cast were like, "Well, fuck this, we're not going to do this." And so
Hmm.
Showtime had to give him an unprecedented contract. Not only did they have to give him an unlimited budget, like a blank check for everything, but also every person involved in the show, you know, hundreds of people, had to sign an ironclad non-disclosure form that has never, ever been achieved in the history of legality post-internet. But
Hmm.
every week there were no leaks anywhere. No one had any
Yeah.
clue what was going to happen, and we were all excited. And we'd be all like, we'd all sit in front of the TV on Sunday night. It was like when we were kids, you know, except no ads and
Hmm.
lots of sex and violence. And we were like, man,
Had
you
no
know,
Yeah.
idea
this
what was
is,
going to happen because you didn't read
oh,
about it on Reddit, like, an hour before it
Yeah, and
showed or a
I
week
managed
before it
to
showed.
avoid. I didn't see it until a few years later, and I managed to not see any spoilers about it. So
Same,
I was
actually.
fair.
I actually haven't finished The Return. I was mentioning this like off filming, but like I haven't even finished The Return yet. I still need to. I'm about halfway through it and I still have no idea what happens in the second half, like somehow.
well, what's
So gotta
amazing, well,
hand it to the fandom for
Well,
being
I
cool.
spoiled the thing about the rubber glove, but
It's fine. That doesn't tell me anything until I get there.
right. And you got to number eight, which, you know, number eight doesn't seemingly is a tangent and doesn't advance the plot in the modern day, and yet it's really the engine from a esoteric occult point of view.
hmm
The whole thing,
Mhm.
the whole mythology hinges on it, you know, and it's a little different. Mark Frost in season two was developing an alchemical mythology that was based on real alchemical novels like Zanoni by Edward Bulwer Lytton, Lovecraft, and a whole bunch of this kind of
Mhm.
real life alchemy, you know, Paracelsus, all this kind of stuff. And all the references are all through the last few episodes. And then very much in the last episode, which Lynch directed. But Lynch didn't really uh, you know, Lynch was like, it's going to go out with a bang. I'm going to correct these mistakes. And, you know, immediately the last episode really does play like a lead into the movie because it is much more dark than the
yeah,
entire series. You know, just if only the fact Annie is going to die, you think, and Wyndham Earl is suddenly not played as a joke villain, but like, well, he's played as a dark villain, but he's also revealed to be incompetent by Bob destroying him. So, oops, spoilers.
Hey,
But
are you sure you don't want to
That's
talk
fine.
about this? About
Yeah, it
Twin
sounds like
Peaks?
you might really want to
I
talk
think we've
about
talked
this,
about
Yeah.
this one more than
actually.
Erie, Indiana at this point.
okay,
So.
well, I'm going to turn it over to one of you cast then. Kaelyn, what do you have? You've got a few, so give us one.
Sure. So I wanted to talk about some of my favorite Asian horror TV series today. So first up is one that people may or may not raise their eyebrows at because there's a lot of debate of whether it qualifies as horror or not, but I say, gosh darn it, yes, it does. It's a 2010-2011 anime series called Madoka Magica, and it's basically a deconstruction of the magical girl genre. So if you guys know, like, you know, Sailor Moon and Cardcaptor Sakura and like all those like classic magical girl shows that I grew up on, it's basically turning that on its head and going extremely dark out of seemingly nowhere. Basically the premise is girls who have like a desperate wish that they want achieved can make a deal with this cute furry critter that may or may not be the actual devil or an alien. He's an alien. And in exchange for becoming a magical girl. And they have to fight witches. And as you go through the show, you find out that magical girls eventually evolve into witches. So the witches are like the big monsters in the show. They're really surreal and visually terrifying, just because it's just very like unhinged in the aesthetic. You kind of go from this like pastel, very cutesy visual style of like most of the anime, and then when you're encountering witches and the like magic that they create, it's like this very dark, very surreal, like almost like kind of, I almost want to say it's like Monty Python-esque with like kind of the visual style, except just very creepy. There's like these little white furry balls with mustaches. There's like butterflies that are like oddly colored, just all kinds of weird stuff like that. Like it's honestly impossible to describe. So basically this is going on, and there's these two young girls who are best friends, and they're getting mentored by one of these magical girls and trying to decide if they want to go for it or not. Meanwhile, there's another girl who's saying, don't do it, it's a trap, basically, like don't do it.
Right.
And so the girl who's mentoring them gets her head bitten off in the third episode by one of the witches. And then you realize this is not a typical magical girl anime. And
Right.
it only gets darker from there. That's the starting point. So
What was the name of this again, Kaelyn?
It is called Madoka Magica. It's just a 12-episode thing. There's also a couple movies. There's 3 movies. 2 of them are retellings of the series, and then there's a third movie that is a sequel. But yeah, like the original show was only 12 episodes long. You can binge it in a day easily. And it is absolutely fascinating. So I really enjoyed it a lot. And just
where do you stream this, or can you?
You can watch it right now, I know for sure, on Funimation, because that's the streaming service that I have, and I know it's on there.
I was gonna say, because Tubi is starting to add like tons of anime.
Yeah.
I haven't even had
I
a
don't know
chance
if
to
it's
look
on
through all
Tubi
of them.
or not, because I have Funimation, so I just kind of check there first for everything, because
Sure.
like, well, I'm already paying for it, so.
Right.
But yeah, no, Tubi is great. Like Tubi has a lot of really good stuff on it, if you don't mind sitting through ads, which I just pretend that it's my childhood and I'm watching TV,
Right.
like old school TV.
Right. Exactly.
No.
That sounds
Yeah.
very cool. I've only heard the name. I knew nothing about it.
No, I honestly can't recommend it enough. And there's like a lot of, it's very psychological, it's very surreal, it's very existential. Like there's not a lot of blood in it. Like you see like a tiny bit, but mostly it's just in like all of the just creepy atmospheric stuff. So it's that type of horror more so than like a blood and gore. And like the monster stuff is honestly not your traditional horror monsters either. So it's all very much about the relationships between the characters and the like honestly trauma of growing up as a girl. There's a lot about that in it. So
Japanese
So this kind of like 70s style? Would you consider it sort of 70s style? I mean, since it's more atmospheric.
yeah, I guess. I don't have like a head like idea of what 70s like atmospheric horror is like off the top of my head, but
Like a lot of the
Definitely
vampire stuff we talked about last week.
yeah,
Yeah,
like some of that, yeah. But since
Yes.
it's animated, like it's just very visually chaotic is the best way I can describe it.
Mm,
Yeah.
that's cool. I like that stuff.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
is something I
So
need to
it's a
add
fun
about
one.
your Indiana is it's very visual, especially for the
Yeah.
time. And there's a lot of moving camera. You see the ceiling all the time. There's subtle inside jokes. There's a spider web and the fly saying help me then there's all sorts of stuff
I got
going
that
on in
from.
the background that you don't necessarily notice. Like in an early episode, there's a guy walks across the background carrying a scythe, which makes you think of communism because he's not dressed like death. But then in a
Oh,
later episode, it shows a guy walking around in the background who is obviously supposed to be death. And I never even noticed him because he's so subtle. He's not. You're looking at something else. You're looking at the main characters of the episode in the shot, and he's just very subtly shows death walking by in the background.
I watched most of that series with my ex-wife, and to be honest, I didn't pay as close attention as she did. I liked what I saw though, but that's been about 12 years ago, so I would
Yeah.
need to
I'm gonna
sit
have to
down with
check
it.
it out. That sounds really
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
Mm.
It's a
I
So,
really
like
good show.
visually
And if you
interesting
look on the
stuff for sure.
Wikipedia page and look at the production order numbers on the
mhm,
side, that's a better
one,
way to watch it because
Hmm.
yes.
there is a whole trope with a milk truck that runs when you watch him in the original order. You really see it as a theme there. It's got Toby Maguire as a ghost.
Oh my
People keep getting
God.
hit by this milk truck that won't slow down. There are three characters who nearly or do get hit with his milk truck that won't slow down. Like, why didn't this guy get arrested? And
So,
then you find out there's a guy driving a milk truck who's an old man who is apparently Marshall, having gone because there's a
into
whole
the
thing
future.
about Indiana not having daylight savings time, and he's from New Jersey. It's like that's another time with me because my family is originally from New Jersey, though I'm not.
I
Um,
was born in New
but
Jersey.
but
So
but
Oh,
is that.
but he decides to set his watch for the extra hour, and that's how he ends up in the other dimension in this missing hour. And
Mm,
and apparently he got trapped there
that's
later
pretty
on in life.
clever.
And it's
mm.
funny because like after about a year after I moved to New York, Indiana actually decided to adopt daylight savings time.
Hey, let me ask you this real quick before we go on to our next contestant, our next panelist. Um, what this came out when you said 891 90.
91, 92 season.
So Toby Maguire is younger than me, so not by much, but I'm assuming that he was a small child
He was about he seemed like he was about 15 or so.
That
because
sounds about right. Yeah.
he was in his early 20s, early to mid 20s at the oldest when the first Spider-Man came out. Because
Hmm.
I'd already seen
Yeah,
him and I
Mm.
liked him in
his
the Ice
his
Storm
character
and
was
Wonder
killed in
Boys.
1929 and was a ghost.
It's pretty cool. I didn't know he did
Mm.
any television. Okay, so Francis, how do you feel about telling us about one of your picks?
Okay, God, I'm not sure which one I'm going to talk about first. Let me see here. Actually,
Decide
I guess I'm
fast.
going to
I'm
start
kidding.
off with. I'm going to start off with the Grim Reaper. This is actually from.
Ooh.
It's from the Boris Karloff thriller series that was in 19 ran
Mm.
for 2 seasons in 1960 and 1961. It's all in black and white. I'm not really sure how popular this was. I mean, I've heard really good reviews from other people, and I have to admit that
I love
I've
it.
watched
Yeah.
about 4 or 5 of the episodes, and they're really quite good. I would say in some ways I actually prefer 1960s horror to a lot of the later stuff. But anyway,
Mm.
this is the one that's got William Shatner, Natalie Schaefer, and Scott Marrow. And I think there's one other guy I can't remember. One other woman I can't remember her name. She's one who plays the secretary. And it's basically it's kind of a weird plot. It starts off, the prologue is basically his father coming to look for a son who's an artist, and then he discovers that his son is hanging. He's hanged himself, and he's known for doing like macabre art. And the last piece was the Grim Reaper. It's best, it's basically the skeleton with the scythe, and the robe and everything. And then we find out that like 15 of the 17 owners who have had it have died from some,
Mm.
like catastrophically. So anyway, we cut to the present, and you have Paul, kind of the he's kind of an anti-hero protagonist, and he's played by William Shatner too. I think this is
Mm.
before his Star Trek days. I'm not really. Do you know when
Yeah,
Star Trek started?
66.
66.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay. So this is before that, I guess, by at least by 5 years.
Before he even did Incubus.
Oh my God! Wow.
I love
I've seen
Incubus.
Incubus
I love that movie.
in
Go ahead.
Esperanto.
Okay,
Yes.
I've yet to see
In
it. I've heard of
Esperanto, cool.
So anyway, he goes there to warn his aunt about this dreadful, because his aunt is she's a horror writer, and she's got, and her whole place is sort of like this, like a haunted mansion kind of thing. Um, Probably not a stereotype, but I mean it just looks spooky. So anyway, she's got the portrait of the Grim Reaper in her library, and he goes there to say, oh, you shouldn't have this because 15 of the 17 people who've owned it have died, etc. And then he brushes his finger on it, this blood comes out. And anyway, though, so I should probably add that his aunt has been married at least 4 times, and now she has this younger husband. And basically, what happens is they go out and chat in the balcony and everything. And then later on, we see that younger husband trying to sort of like make out with the secretary. And the aunt happens to catch them in the act too. And so she gets really depressed. She goes to the library, starts drinking brandy and talking to the portrait of the Grim Reaper. And later on, we find out that she's died on the steps. It's really not clear how she dies, but anyway, after that, they're all talking about her will and what to do about it. And then, they get the lawyer in, and he basically says that the entire property has been left to her to her husband. And Paul is not exactly happy about this. And so later on, what he does is he basically tries to have him framed and commits suicide by giving him this poison pill. So he dies. And so Paul is now, that's the William Shatner character, is just ecstatic. He's happy. This whole place to himself. When he starts hearing these really weird noises and everything, he decides, maybe he really ought to leave the place. And so when he's on his way out, he bumps into the secretary, and she says, I've got to destroy this painting because it's dangerous, all this. So she goes there and she tries to destroy it. She tries to go there and destroy it, but he pushes her. Paul tries to push her away. They get into a struggle. She tries to leave, and he's basically like sort of locked in there. And so when she goes out, he realizes he's trapped in there. And then you see the sides sort of like coming at him. You don't actually see the figure at all, but just that there's something swishing and it's cutting away at him. And then later on, when the secretary returns with, I think, a detective, they find that he's dead on the ground, and that this mark it's a really strange mark. What is it? It's the scythe. So it just pretty much ends there. And it's kind of a simple story. I mean, yeah, there's a little twist with the fact that here is William Shatner playing kind of a villain. And what I like is all like the touches, like you have the really eerie string music in the background. And even though it's black and white, I think what's great is like, when you're seeing the portrait of the skeleton, there's a fireplace, and so you see the lights going in and out. And then the lawyer who's reading the will basically says, look at that portrait, it's really weird. I mean, it's like those eyes just follow you around. So it's just really, it's spooky. I guess it's more spooky than outright scary. And it's only about 50 minutes long. And that's really it. So, that's it. But I just thought that, I mean, it's very, very atmospheric.
Yeah, I Googled it. It's an episode of Thriller.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it's one of the last ones, actually.
I actually remember that episode really clearly. Like, I thought when you said William Shatner and then the more you described it, that's one of the few of those I've seen probably twice. Me and my ex-wife went through the whole series, and then later I restarted and watched some more of it. But yeah, that's a great episode. That is a great episode.
William did a good job describing. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, he was in a few of those episodes, actually.
And he was in Twilight Zone, of course. Two Twilight Zones.
Okay.
The one that was remade in the movie with John Lithgow, where he sees the monster on the wing of the plane. That's a Matheson. Richard Matheson. Yeah. That was
it was
Shatner.
also the one with this satanic fortune-telling machine in a restaurant.
Yeah.
That
is a messed up episode, but it's the Twilight Zone.
I remember seeing that in a holiday marathon. I think it was Thanksgiving or something.
That one never gets old. The Twilight Zone. I will say I've probably seen every episode at least 5 times. Yeah. It's so. Bill,
Okay.
what do you have? What do you have for us, man?
I picked two, and then if we get to it, a surprise third. TV movies, because I love TV movies. I'm old enough. TV movies could be pretty good.
Yeah.
They were TV. They were not going to show you extreme gore. They were filmed for TV. They didn't have widescreen. There's a lot of limitations, but sometimes they were pretty good stuff. And everyone remembers Trilogy of Terror. Specifically, everyone remembers the last of the three stories in Trilogy of Terror, because it still gives nightmares to this day. The Zuni fetish doll is just,
Yeah.
oh my God. Yeah.
Right?
When that thing was over and they go to end, and it's like, well, good night. No.
I never saw it, but I remember as a kid seeing the box and thinking it looked terrifying.
Well, it is. It's worth watching. They made a sequel. It's not that good. Well, so they also did another one called Dead of Night. And if you look up Dead of Night, there's a bunch of things with that title, but this is from 1977. It's another Dan Curtis, who did Dark Shadows and a lot of these things.
Mm-hmm.
It's written by Richard Matheson. Wait, am I right about that?
Probably.
Yes, Richard Matheson. I get Richard Matheson and Robert Bloch mixed up sometimes. What's that?
Yeah, he's in a lot of these these
shows.
Like,
he
60s,
was
70s.
Lots of stuff.
In fact, my next one is going to be from him too.
But here's the pattern that you see with these anthologies. 2 fairly lame stories, and then the last one kicks your ass and leaves you with an image that it will haunt your nightmares. And this one does that totally. It's got 3 stories. First one's called Second Chance. It's got Ed Begley Jr., and it's something about a haunted car. And even though I literally just watched it, I literally can't tell you anything about it. It's boring. It's just boring. Haunted car, something. I don't remember. It is just.
Is it like Christine?
No, nothing at all like that. More like I don't know.
James Brolin, the car.
Maybe someone was killed in the car, and now the car's trying. Nothing exciting happens. Just keep on going. Ed Begley Jr. is a nice actor, but second one's called No Such Thing as Vampires. Okay, things are picking up. At least we will actually have some vampires here. Spoiler alert, we may or may not actually have vampires. This is one of those EC comic stories of a bad marriage. And almost all marriages in these anthologies are bad marriages where one of them is going to be killed in an ironic way. And that's what it's all about, irony. He was a fussy guy who made his wife do lots of housework, and she kills him and stuffs him into jars and has them all labeled very nicely on the shelf. The end. Okay,
great story.
Yeah, that's a great story. It's not in this one, but
George Evans.
Similar. Yep. And it's about a woman who fears that vampires are trying to kill her, and her husband enlists the help of his best friend to try to get her out of this. Elijah Cook is this twitchy as hell manservant there. He does that great. The husband's played by Patrick McNee, who's just like an old comfortable shoe. You've seen him in a million things. And I like movies like this because you see these actors who are not, okay, their best years are behind them, but it's nice to see them getting work, and they play it seriously. They realize they're not doing Shakespeare. They're doing Dead of Night, doing a story inside Dead of Night, but they're getting paid and they're going to give it their all. And I respect that commitment to the art. And if you don't see the ending coming, you're not paying attention. It's pretty obvious. And there's the problem. There's the problem with these things. Once you know there's a shock ending or an attempt at a shock ending, there's only about 5 shock endings. There really are. There's only about 5 of them. There's one of them is a vampire / werewolf. Okay, that's a classic. There's they were dead all along. That's usually how these things end. There's if it's set in outer space, I guarantee that the ending is they find the planet Earth, and that's when they first mention that their names are Adam and Eve. Whoa, head blown. I did not see that coming. Or it either takes, you think it's in the past, but it's really in the future, or you think it's in the future, but it's really in the past.
All of this has happened, and it will.
We did that
again.
Before, so you'll probably see the ending of this coming, but it's actually pretty good. All right, at this point, I'm like, man, I guess it's the 70s, and I'm watching a TV movie. It's as good as it's going to get. And then they come up with the last one, Bobby. And Bobby it's got Joan Hackett, who is a woman whose son has died, and she is using the occult to bring him back. And she does. She succeeds, and it's a happy ending, and that's the end. No, of course not. It goes horribly wrong. This is a huge mistake. Don't dick around with the supernatural. I wrote a whole book on that premise. Yeah, ask for it by name. Anyway, yeah, pimp it at least once an episode. Okay, I don't want to give too much away because it's got a great ending. It's got a really it sent chills down my spine. Now, watching it again now, I see it now. It's like, boy, they did not even try with things like makeup or special effects or anything. But damn it, it's still pretty creepy, and it was just a hell of a way to send you off. Now I say I'm not going to spoil it, but if you pick up the DVD or the videotape, if you're really looking old school, it's spoiled because it's the cover. They literally put the last shot on
That's like
cover.
they did with the VHS of Freaks.
Yes.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I just complete idiots. So highly recommend it. And I kind of wonder though, it puzzles me because again, Trilogy of Terror with Karen Black, 3 stories. One of them had evil twins. Okay, listen, if you're watching anything about evil twins, if there is not a scene where they don't Patty Duke the action and actually show the twins together, there are no twins. It's one person who's a schizo, and they think they're twins, but they really aren't twins. They throw their voice or they imagine. It's just not twins. And boy, yeah. Well, at least with the other, we actually saw them together. So there was, but we're seeing it through his head, I guess. Great movie, by the way, very underrated. Yeah. So, they had these 2 lame stories with Karen Black, who I really like. And then they did the one with the Zuni doll and nightmares to this day. And I just wonder, why would you have 2 lame stories and then one really good one when they're all by the same writer who's capable of writing 3 really good stories? And I kind of wonder, is that the premise? Was it that the censors told them you can't have 3 stories as scary as this one? It's like, well, what if we do 2 lame ones? Can we then say, okay, I guess a 1/3 good to lame ratio is all right? Or was this a strategy to try to sucker you in? Because, we didn't have VCRs and everything back then. Once you started watching, you were committed. There were only 3 channels. You've already missed the first 20 minutes of whatever else. So you're going to watch all the way through. And you watch, okay, lame story. Okay, that one was a little better, lame. Third, and then you're because you've been suckered into thinking that you're going to watch something fairly and it goes into something else. Oh, who calls me now? Anyway, that is my review of Dead of Night. And you can find it probably on YouTube. In fact, I have a question. Sure.
Was Bobby influenced by the monkey's paw?
That's what I thought too.
Yes, it was. And if you have, and really everyone's read the monkey's paw, and they should know by now that's how these things go terribly badly. It's also, I believe, it was also remade in the Twilight Zone, one of the reimaginings of the Twilight Zone. I think they did another version of it, which was not as good. So,
what did you?
Even inspired Pet Cemetery.
What did you think of Death Dream, Bill? Which is based on
I liked Death Dream quite a bit, and you're right. Pet Cemetery also pretty influenced by this. Listen, bringing the dead back to life. Best case scenario, they were in heaven and you just yanked them out. You buffied them. That's the best case scenario. They're going to resent that. Worst case scenario, maybe they weren't in heaven.
Right.
Either way, you just brought them back. They're either really pissed or they're demons.
Well,
I just want to say I appreciate you turning Buffy into a verb. That's
Thank you.
I like that.
Love Buffy.